Oink. Okay, so we are recording. Good morning. So today we're talking about this. Allah, what did I do again? I keep doing the wrong thing. There, that's what I wanted to do. I keep doing the wrong thing. There. So, uh, if you're wondering, what the one of the themes, one of the main ideas I was playing with module four of your module was this one, right? Because nga, in the idea of this global thing influencing the individual. And one of the things that it seemed to show was that we have this there's a kind of suffering that people go through um, in the system, right? And it's a unique kind of suffering in the sense that before the world became what it is, we more modern and more uh, interconnected, we didn't have it. So what am I talking about? Well, the idea of this, the idea of separation, loneliness, coupled with right this increasing uh, focus on materialism and commodification. So, and these things kind of come together and create a kind of suffering. You get what I mean, right? That's why we have a term called retail therapy where people try to ease whatever emotional suffering they have by buying stuff or getting stuff. And I'm not innocent of that. I've bought stuff to make myself feel better before just checking something. Um, like this. Um, these are things I buy to make myself feel better. Um, right. So why is it that we have that relationship now with why there's a relationship between suffering and materialism or stuff, right? And really, we can talk about uh, the system that we're in. That's one of the reasons for that. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about three works that I showed during the module, and I wanted to get your ideas on it, right? How you felt about it and how it relates to this idea of suffering and materialism and how they kind of weirdly work uh, together in current in contemporary human experience. So the first one is the Polaroid job, right? You guys saw the film, right? Okay, somebody, one, two people saw the film, four people saw the film, five, right? Anybody else? So I am assuming the others didn't see the film. Wonderful. It's a short film, right? How did you? I've read some of your stuff on on the canvas, but what are your opinions first for the others who may not have written? What are your opinions on? Go.
So for me po, when I watched the film, well, at first glance, like after you finish the 8 to 10 minute film, you would think that it's very lighthearted, that
Mm-hmm.
there's really no issue at present. Na like the lighthearted way that the writer or the narrator expressed his life story was like, is as if nagkukwento lang siya to his family and friends. But in reality, if you look deeper into it, it reflects a reality that happens in the business world, or a concept I'm familiar with, that you can have a business that you love doing, that di ba sabi nga po nila, they're able to see the smiles on people's faces and they enjoy doing it. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, if it isn't successful, if it doesn't give you money, if it doesn't give you money, then you have no choice but to shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I think that was some. I think I don't know if Marriott is here. Marriott, are you here? You said something about your experiences on uh, something similar about with cooking, right?
No, sir. Yes
Yeah.
po.
Kwento mo naman.
Yung katulad po ng nilagay ko sa discussion board, this pandemic po, parang it affected po yung family po ng tita ko, na
Uh-huh.
kapitbahay lang po namin, kaya na-witness ko po yung journey nila. Naapektuhan po yung parang financial status ng family nila. And watching the film, The Polaroid Job, reminded me of how they came up with several ways to make ends meet during the pandemic, especially no mga first months po. Parang yung katulad po nung nilagay ko sa discussion board, it started out as a hobby na
Yeah.
parang hindi, at first, hindi nila intention na gawin siyang source of income, na parang bored lang sila because suddenly all of us in the pandemic, during lockdown, we all suddenly have this overflowing amount of free time, and hobby po ng tita ko and ng husband niya na magluto and gumawa ng pastries and all that. So parang nag-umpisa po siya as a hobby, and hindi po nila naisip na pwede siyang maging source of income. But then suddenly nung parang mas tumitindi na po yung tension sa financial status ng family nila, parang they had an idea na what if gawin nating business yung pagluluto or paggawa ng pastry. So parang kami po yung naging unang taga-tikim ng mga in-experiment na lang dishes and pastries, and then so that they can improve it based on our feedback and all that. So I just witnessed that yung story na it became, at first it became a hobby, but then because they experienced that they did that hobby while experiencing the problems brought about by the pandemic, parang that hobby transitioned into something serious, and it became a successful business. It became a successful online business na yun na po yung naging source of income nila, and it helped them na maging mas stable financially during the pandemic. And until now, nagpapatuloy po yung pastry business nila, and it helped a lot since yung parang nawalan po kasi ng trabaho for several months yung husband ng
Yeah.
tita ko. And yun po yung naging way nila. Kasi meron po silang dalawang anak na pinsan ko po. And yung business po na yun is nakatulong po para mapagpatuloy yung schooling ng dalawang pinsan ko.
Oh, wow,
So,
that's important. Yeah. So there, no? And I think that was one of the things that the Polaroid job showed is this. One was, of course, the reality of just trying to make ends meet. No? And it's something that every family faces. It's varying degrees, right? Some families will have it easier than others because maybe the parents have good jobs or have stable businesses. But I think to a degree, most of us anyway, have that experience of trying to find out how to make ends meet. And the Polaroid job was, as uh, Merit said, and she actually described it in her discussion board as parang office humor, which is the office humor, which is I think about right. And it was an unusual job, and they had they were basically doing photo shoots for parties with Polaroid cameras. You really have to keep the camera, and you see that here, right? You get those. I don't know if you've been to some parties na mayroong photo booth, right? And then you have props and stuff, and you wear them, and you have these funny pictures that you take, um, and you can take home. And the thing is, it's a way of making ends meet, right? And I think one of the things that was stark about this is one, they tried, right? They tried, and they were a little successful at the start. But what they realized was that because of the nature of the job, that it dependent on holidays. Na pag walang holiday, wala silang trabaho. And that's kind of what killed the business, right? So they had a lot of work in Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter, right? But then there's this huge gap, right? Easter, and then the next one might be 4th of July, and then the next one might be uh, Halloween, na, right? And so if you're trying to base your family's income just on that, and you have these months where you have nothing, that's not a very sustainable um, business. And like Marit said, that echoes very closely with what goes on today, right? In a lot of households, in a lot of places in the Philippines and around the world, in truth, where a lot of people lost jobs because of COVID and are now trying to figure out new ways of trying to make ends meet. But the whole need to make ends meet is due to that system, right? That we have to buy stuff and we have to spend on stuff and we have to uh, generate an income, right? To be able to acquire things, and the demands of it is startling. As a matter of fact, now, there's an interesting uh, statistic that has happened where in the States, for example, jobs have not really increased significantly over the past, I think, 10, 15 years, but costs have doubled. So in other words, you're you literally have half as much purchasing power as you did 10, 15 years ago, which could mean that you're really just not making enough. And that was the thing about the Polaroid job. It was funny because of the pictures. It was you know, the mom was dressed as a creepy Easter bunny and stuff. It was funny, but at the same time, you had this sense of the the difficulty of it, right? And that's one of the aspects they want to show, right? That material aspect of it, the difficulty of it. That's why you had the poem like calling him back from layoff, for example, which I think was a very good way of showing how people are um, losing their jobs and then finally being called back to get hired. And there were very, I love the way they were describing how the guy reacted to it, that he was being called back to the job. And that's how important jobs are now. Uh, and it's not a matter of self-fulfillment. It's a lot of times it's a matter of economic survival. Anything else you guys want to say about it? Sophia and I actually have something to say, but she's still connecting, so I don't know if she's in. Right. But anybody else who saw the film have anything to say about the Polaroid job? Once again, let's move on to this one. This one, I'm surprised, Pooh, that there is such a job. Yeah, that's true. There is, right? There are a lot of goofy jobs out there. Let's talk about Murakami's The Year of Spaghetti. Right? And I think for this one, uh, Jonathan had an interesting insight. We here. Right here, Jonathan, you're here. Tell us about your insight about noodles.
Ah, wait, hold on. Medyo nakalimutan ko.
You said something about uh, cooking spaghetti, throwing love letters in the fireplace, right?
Ah,
And he said that Japan's connection with the Japan's of instant noodles.
oh yeah, I mean, because you asked the question, is it weird that Japan, uh, that you connected to noodles? So like, I just thought, yeah, so yeah, I mean, they have instant noodles, so I thought that uh, it's trying to say that loneliness, like cooking noodles, takes a longer time. You know, I
Yes.
mean, that loneliness is can affect someone for a long time and make their, lonely. Tapos, the line that says the smell like goes through the whole apartment and like goes to other outside as well. So I thought that meant that loneliness will also affect those around you, that and that it will be like a cycle, like in what he said, like he's lonely, right? But then when someone tried to talk to him or something, he said he just wants to be alone. So it just keeps going around and around that, that he becomes lonely. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Ella also had an interesting thing. Ella, you seem to. I don't know if you have a source for this, but you're saying that Murakami wanted to be a solitary being in 1971.
Oh, sir, I kind of just inferred that from the
Ah.
text because I kind of saw how he talked about, like, he kind of used spaghetti as a barrier between himself and the rest of Japanese society. Like the fact that he was actively like trying to make spaghetti for an entire year, and it was a dish that he that for himself he could only eat it alone. Like
Mhm.
it was his own effort in trying to isolate himself from everyone else, and that was through his meals. And in a way, he was also trying to culturally separate himself because
Mhm.
in Japan, everybody, like, people are very they're very nationalistic when it comes to their own culture and the food that they eat. But he chose to stray from that, so he really wanted to isolate himself from everyone else, like not only physically but also through his practices, like during meal times and things like that. So I
And
think
yeah, go go
like
go
sorry,
go go go.
during that time, like uh he was putting up mental, emotional, and physical barriers between himself and other people, like through the use of spaghetti. So my thoughts on it was he kind of he really found a way to use spaghetti in every aspect of his life as a reason to remain alone, not only physically during mealtime, but also mentally and emotionally in the way that
Mm.
he used it to, like, tell his ex-girlfriend, hey, I'm cooking spaghetti, please leave me alone. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, so it kind of about it's a weird reason when you think about it. Hey, I'm cooking spaghetti. I can't talk to you. Right now. But yeah, so he seemed to be creating this barrier um, around himself. And the thing is, well, for Murakami, kasi a lot of his work has to do with separation or alienation, where he his characters are often in one way or the other, in one way or the other, separated from people, and sometimes it's their choice, and sometimes it's by circumstance. But there's this idea of an inability to connect, and that's very, if you want to look at the history of literature, that's a very modern sensibility. And the modern sensibility will often say that the reason for the separation, whether on purpose or not, is because of modern times, right? And so the other thing, as you guys pointed out, the spaghetti isn't a native dish in Japan. That's not to say that it isn't there. It is. It exists in Japan. We go to UCC, for example, and they'll have pasta dishes. They're a little weird, granted, but they have pasta dishes. And I think the just the mere composition of spaghetti as being made of noodles is something that makes it a little more accessible for Asians, because we are familiar with noodles. But yeah, the character in the story uses the excuse of spaghetti as a kind of uh, escape, you might say, um, from the need to connect. So and this is exactly what I was saying about how, and Murakami does this very rather on the nose, right? but also metaphorically, where he uses spaghetti, a thing, right, as this outlet for loneliness. And yet, as he says also, it's not, it doesn't quite work, right? You're putting your all into spaghetti, but at the same time you eat it alone, but at the same time you're still lonely. So it's both this rather stubborn insistence on relying on the materialism and the material stuff, right, to try and make yourself feel better. But at the same time, you're uh, you're not satisfied, and that's very symptomatic of a lot of contemporary society. That we look for emotional relief, usually in things. And what happens is the things may provide temporary relief, which is I think what happens when he eats the spaghetti. That's why the ritual is important to him, right? Because it's a ritual. It's something that takes your mind off uh, something else, and that's why he uses it, right? It's a long kind of it's a long kind of involved ritual that the making of spaghetti involves, right? But at the end, yeah, it's still about separation. It's still about this inability to connect with other people. He couldn't even connect with his girlfriend, right? And is it because he doesn't love her? No, he just can't connect. And that's something that a lot of Murakami stories have. But it is something that is also very true, not just of Japanese society, but of society in general. That people have problems connecting. In Murakami's case, right, if you look at Japanese culture, then it seems to point to not naman the exact reason, no, but possible reasons for, I don't know if you've heard of the term hikikomori, right? The shut-ins. And it's that there. The although it's more extreme now with the shut-ins, it's more extreme that they fear the outside, they fear contact with other people, and so they just lock themselves in their houses. But there is that conflict of I'm lonely, but I don't know how or don't want to connect with other people, right? There's this, I don't know if you've seen it, there's this anime on Netflix called Call Me Can't Communicate, which I think is becoming pretty popular. It's about a girl a beautiful girl who can't interact with people, right? And it's a little strange, right? And psychologically, it's not exactly the best example of how to deal with it. But um, I think it's a representation of how people are now. That there are people who have that kind of anxiety that they don't know what to do, right? And so, well, for some people, they'll turn to other stuff, and it's not just Call Me who's actually having communication problems in the anime. If you've seen it, there are people who are too talkative, and there are people who will fantasize of that they are these characters, right? As a way of dealing with other people. And what happens is it just makes them look strange, right? And that I think is part of what we deal with day to day. That people have to deal with the stresses of the world and can't really deal. And so what happens is they escape, right? So there, and I think we have time for one more. And this one I really think is an interesting point of discussion. So some people apparently are having connection issues. That's okay. We're recording anyway, so you can watch the recording. So that's sad though that we have people having problems with recording. So because it's a graded thing, I'm not gonna, and I'm sure all of you answered it, or some of you answered it. But in general, diba, what do you think about Lord De Vera's short story, Satan Has Already Bought You? Very real, huh? It's dark, but it's true. What some people are saying. You know what's interesting? This was written before the Duterte administration. Right? This is part of a collection of works called Manila Noir, right? Which I think you can still get, right? It's part of a collection of books called Manila Noir, and it was published in 2013, so 3 years, right, before the Duterte administration. And you know what's interesting is when it was written more as an exaggerated work, right? It was written more as a piece of film of noir fiction, dark crime fiction, which was, supposed to be an exaggeration of what was happening. And yet, right, years later, and you guys are saying it's very real, it's very true. And that kind of tells us the state of things, isn't it? Right? And I guess, as a way back, but do you guys have any experiences with, not saying taking, but like maybe do you know people, has things like this happened in your neighborhood? Sophia, go.
Sir, in our neighborhood po, like we are surrounded by drug users here.
Really?
Yes, sir. And then may mga cases po here of pagnanakaw po ganun. And then meron naman pong mga nare-rehab po or nakukulong pero nakakalabas pa rin po and they're like I think they're still using drugs. So it's really scary here po, to be
Where
honest.
are you ba?
San Mateo po, near Marikina.
Yeah, I've heard of that area. I've heard of
San
that.
Mateo, sir?
Yeah. There was
Opo.
another former student of mine lived near the area also. Ganun
Yes, sir.
din.
Marami po dito.
She actually had a really scary story. Because she's pretty. She was a pretty girl, and she was walking home one evening, and then this guy suddenly walks over to her. Inakbayan siya, right? And then started talking to her like they know each other, but he had a knife to her side, nakatago, and he was leading her away from where she wanted to go. He was leading her away from her house, and buti na lang, there were some people playing basketball in the nearby basketball court, and parang noticed it. I guess noticed that she was uncomfortable and that she was being threatened. That if she said anything, she'd get hurt. Uh, Went over to her and acted like he knew her also. And the other guy panicked and ran away. But yun, sabi nga niya, if that continued, she wouldn't know where the guy was going to bring her. But yun nga, it was palayo from the populated areas, so scary. And well, she's fine, right? She's married, she's happily married and stuff now. But that was a scary story when she told me that. So yeah, real stuff. Right? And I think, is it still shabu that's the drug of choice these days?
Sir, I'm not sure po here kung ano po yung ginagamit. But there are, we can see some maliliit pong plastic, the clear ones.
Yeah, that's shabu.
Yes, that one po, sir. Marami po dito nagkalat.
You, ingat ka. Ingat ka.
Yes, sir. Lagi po
Okay.
sila sa labas paggabi na nakaupo po, ganyan.
Ooh, right. Anybody else have experiences like that? Ikaw rin?
Yes po. Naalala ko lang po yung story nung it happened po nung elementary student pa lang po ako. Dito po kasi sa barangay namin parang magkakakilala po lahat. So, medyo mabilis pong kumalat yung chismis, gano'n. And meron pong one time parang meron pong isang parang family na nag-move po sa barangay namin and meron parang nagpatayo po sila ng bahay and yung bahay po is malaki, mansion po siya. So parang naging usap-usapan po na, uy, bigla na lang nagpatayo ng bahay, mayaman siguro. Saan ba nanggaling yan? Yung mga ganun pong usapan po ng mga chismosa. And naririnig ko rin po yung usapan nila. And then, so months later, nang pagkatapos pong mapatayo yung bahay, isang araw parang bigla na lang pong nabalita. Alam ko po nabalita po to sa TV eh. Yung bigla na lang pong parang may namaril dun sa bahay. And then, nung nadaanan ko po yung bahay, nung on the way po kami sa school, ang dami pong parang mga marks ng bullet. Parang may mga bullet holes po yung gate ng bahay nila, ganon. And then later on, nalaman po namin na parang drug dealer po pala yung may-ari ng bahay. And then, parang may tinakbuhan po siyang mga customers niya and nagalit po kasi parang dinaya niya po ganun or ninakawan niya po yata ng money and hindi ko na po masyadong maalala yung story since hindi po ako masyadong interested sa details since bata pa po ako nung nangyari to, but then reading the story made me remember that story dito po sa barangay namin, and I think they already moved out pero yung bahay po is parang pinenta po sa iba, and parang hanggang ngayon po nandun pa rin po yung ibang marks po ng bullet holes. So ayun po, medyo na nakakatakot po 'yun nung time po na narinig ko yung story. Ayun lang po.
Sir, are you talking po? Naka-mute po kayo.
Whoops. Nagko-comment lang. I was. No, and I was listening lang to what Marit was saying, and the reality, of that, of the drug problem in the Philippines. So, given that, do you think therefore that it was the right idea for Rodrigo Duterte to crack down on drugs? Who's this? Bea, and then Ella. Sige.
Sir, I was just going to share din po another story because I was reminded a bit about yung sinabi niyo po sa previous student niyo po. Because here po sa my area namin, parang medyo marami din pong squatter. Tapos sabi-sabi din po na parang nagbebentahan din sila ng mga shabu, ganon. Tapos naalala ko lang po, a couple of years back, my dad was, he chose to commute on his way home. So along Marcos Highway, Santa Lucia, if you know that, sir.
Yeah. I used to live there.
Parang parang tinabihan siya bigla na isang mama, tapos tinapatan siya ng baril sa likod, tapos hinihingan siya ng wallet. Ang alam ko po, may parang chemical odor ang shabu. Parang may,
Yes.
alam ko may scent yun na parang hospital na ewan. Sabi ng tatay ko, he was reeking of that scent. Kaya sabi niya parang, baka mamaya wala to sa tamang pag-iisip. So, it's better to just give up the wallet kasi baka mamaya mabaril pa siya. So, that's what my dad did. Tapos parang pag-uwi niya, sinasabi niya na mag-ingat talaga kasi other people, yung when you're along junction, may kakatok sa car window mo, tapos hihingi ng pera. So, parang kailangan, even though, it's kind of sad to think about that, but kailangan mo rin pag-isipan kung tama ba nabibigyan mo ng pera. Kasi some of those, even the children, they're being told to get money so that they could buy shabu. And parang as a way to make means end as well as to get money rin po. Tas to answer your question about Duterte's administration, I think masyadong extreme yung choice niya to kill people even kahit parang suspicion pa lang, because there are rehabilitation programs for that, and hindi dapat parang patayan agad yung decision na huhulugan, kasi these, even though their decisions in life may be kind of wrong, anak pa rin sila ni someone, parang kapatid pa
Yep,
rin
yep.
sila ni someone, so they're still someone's person, and that's not worth killing over a suspicion that they're using drugs. Yun lang po.
True, true. Thank you, Bea. Oh, Ella, you were saying something?
Sir, I wanted to talk lang po about how the when we speak of drugs or shobu or like illegal drugs here in the Philippines, we often think about people who are below the poverty line, but more often than not, there are also like people in our generation who are or you know people who are part of the youth who are like relatively well off who also participate in illegal drugs. But that isn't often touched upon in media and by the
Mhm.
government in general because, well, ever since the drug war, there's been a recurring pattern of it being entirely anti-poor as a system. When in
Yep.
truth, I actually know a lot of people who aren't who have encountered like close friends who do drugs or something like that, and it's quite concerning because I think that apart from like the violence of it all, like, especially if you're out on the street, there's also a danger to it, especially if it's someone you know, someone you're close to, and someone you trust who's participating in these same illegal activities. So, yeah, um, it's like I think it's kind of scary how it can just um it can come into your life in very unexpected ways aside from violence. So yeah, yes, sorry. That's all.
But yeah, I mean, and it's never really far. I know people also um who were involved, right, with drugs. I have a good friend who was a recovered addict, right? As a matter of fact, he's kind of controversial in the sense that if you guys remember the Visconde massacre, right, long, long ago, right, his family were killed by a bunch of drug addicts. Uh, that was his barkada, right? The people who committed the crime were his barkada, and he was saying that if he didn't get out of, when he did, he would have been part of the group who killed that family. And he was saying that, you know, and they weren't poor, right? To Ella's point, they weren't poor. These were Ayala Alabang folks, right? And saying that the bad thing about substance abuse is that it escalates. So he was saying that they started, pills, right, prescription drugs, then pot, and then so on and so forth. But what he was saying was that the things you do also escalate. So they started with stupid stuff like throwing in the pool, right? Throwing a coin in the water and then diving to see how how long it takes them to get it, or staying underwater holding their breath. It slowly graduated to them starting to kill animals for fun. Yung mga strangling cats. That's what he was saying. Strangling cats for fun, and that was kind of why uh, he left, right? And sabi niya, "Ay, this is wrong na," and he left. Thankfully, he did. Yeah. But sabi nga niya, before he left, he had tried basically everything you can imagine. So sabi nga niya, ask me the drug, I'll tell you the tama. Right? He knows what it was. So he's, he's a very, you wouldn't know it when you see him now. He's a very family man, and yes, he has kids and plays golf. And sabi nga niya, he's lucky he got out. He was thankful he got out and then and that he survived, frankly, right? The whole thing. Somebody is saying here na I think the problem with Duterte's plan is that it does not fix the root of the problem, kaya po it's not effective at all. Instead of rehab, killing siya naging sagot. You know, the funny thing there is, I actually had to attend a briefing of Tokhang here in my barangay. Here. And it was sponsored by the police department. And if you listen to the Tokhang as a policy, not as what practice, as a policy, it was a policy of rehabilitation that they would ask people, right? That the idea of Tokhang was they would knock on someone's door if there was already a suspicion of someone being a drug addict, they would knock on someone's door, and it would be a discussion. And the ending would be, would you like to go to rehab? And we'll escort you, we'll help you. That's the official policy of Tokhang. And when you listen to that, that's not bad, right? The problem is that was not to stand, right? Ang ginawa is that the intelligence being gathered on, you know, drug addicts or suspected drug addicts is being fed to kill people. And that was, I think, for lack of anything better to say, that was a misguided attempt at trying to impose discipline and trying to rule through fear. Right? And they were using the drug addict as the bad guy. The government will defend you against the drug addict as the bad guy. And it will obviously fail. Right? The problem kasi there was the drug problem, quote unquote, that we have never got better. Right? The number of drug addicts, the amount of drug use in the Philippines has not substantially gone down, despite all of this. And so what was it? Well, I was trying to kill people to establish some sort of rule of fear. And you know, as Ella pointed out, it's always the poor that get it because they're the easy targets. Eh? I mean, just an example, no? This I don't know if you were following. One of the Ongpins recently got acquitted for possession of drugs. And this one, his girlfriend killed herself in his room. Or the girl he was with, I don't know if it was his girlfriend, but the girl he was with in his room killed herself. Apparently also, you know, on drugs at the time. And he was being implicated somehow, no, and we don't really know the circumstances. But, you know, he had drugs, clearly, and yet, none, walks out. Same people, sometimes, like, as you said, minsan plastic, little plastic of shabu, papatayin. What's worse pa is sometimes, hindi man sila drug addict, pinapatay pala. Right? On the pretense of. And you see therefore that the point wasn't to go after drug addicts, it was just to try and instill this sense of fear in people. And, you know, it's you know, it's bad, it's horrible, I know, but it's also old. For me, I've seen this and heard this before. It didn't work then, it's not gonna work now. So that's it. Hala, again, we're out of time. It's 10:51. So we can continue more discussions about this on next week, right? I hope you guys, and then if you guys have anything else to say, I'm going to turn off the recording first. So for those of you who didn't come and couldn't connect, just watch the recording.